Hey listeners, welcome to Infinite Podcast. Today, we're diving into the world of esports athletes. These guys' training schedules? Hardcore. League of Legends pros? They're practically living in the game, strategizing, scrimming, reviewing plays. Now, Simon, these routines are no joke, and I bet it takes a toll on their mental game, huh?
Oh, totally. Their brains must be like scrambled eggs after a 12-hour grind session. And the stress? Like constantly defusing a bomb in Counter-Strike, but for real. They've got to have some killer stress balls or something.
Killer stress balls, maybe. But I reckon it's more than toys keeping them sharp. We're talking meditation, physical workouts, and solid sleep schedules. These players are athletes of the mind. Non-gamers could take a page from their book. Discipline is discipline, whether you're clicking a mouse or lifting weights.
Athletes of the mind? Sure. But let's not forget the snack breaks. I mean, you can't conquer digital worlds on an empty stomach, right? Jokes aside, non-gamers getting on that esports regimen might just find themselves more focused at work. But then again, imagine your boss catching you doing finger stretches for your intense data entry session.
Sure, snack breaks are key. But let's be real, those finger stretches, they might look silly at the office, but with how much we're all typing, could be a game changer for preventing strain. I'm not against taking what works in one arena and applying it to another. If esports athletes sharpen their focus with these routines, office warriors could definitely level up their game.
Okay, circling back. Imagine this. If an esports champ's regimen has them laser-focused, could that routine make Dave from accounting stop losing his stapler? Maybe, just maybe, us regular Joes could learn a thing or two about smashing our own daily grinds. But then again, if I start doing wrist exercises at lunch, I fully expect someone to throw a paperclip at me.
Look, I've got to push back a bit. Esports regimens are tailored for high-stakes competition, not everyday tasks. Dave might find the intensity and focus overkill for his stapler woes. Plus, these routines involve hours of practice that just aren't feasible for the 9 to 5 crowd. Context is king, and our daily grind can't always accommodate a gamer's strict schedule. There's got to be a balance, right?
Balance, exactly. Esports folks break down gameplay like it's the Zapruder film, while Dave's biggest challenge is probably a paper jam. But hey, let's be real. We're not all cut out for the grind these gamers go through. Adapting their laser focus? Sure. Literal hours of aim training? Overkill. The average person doesn't need to prep like they're going into digital battle, but maybe there's a middle ground, like swapping sword drills for some occasional mindful meditation at your desk.
You know, Simon, that reminds me of my cousin. She isn't a gamer, but she's into martial arts. Quite the discipline, right? She told me once about how preparing for a tournament wasn't just about the physical stuff. It was this whole mental saga, too. She'd visualize her moves, anticipate her opponent's strategy, kind of like chess with kicks and punches. So there's this one time she's in this major competition, feeling outmatched. What does she do? She goes back to her mental prep. You know, the stuff that seems over the top at times. Turns out, it wasn't. It kept her cool, sharp, on point. And guess what? She took home the gold. When I think about that, sure, we're not all stepping into the ring or squaring up for esports showdowns, but adopting parts of their mental training, that could be the trick to nailing our own everyday battles, like surviving back-to-back Zoom meetings without zoning out.
Your cousin's story is gold, man. Goes to show that battle's half in your head, right? Esports athletes visualize their epic wins just like your cousin, minus the roundhouse kicks. But real talk, anyone feeling out of their league could use some of that mental magic. Just don't try to visualize your report writing itself, because spoiler alert, it won't. What you can do is zone in on the task, block out distractions, and maybe, just maybe, not feel like a zombie after your third virtual meeting.
Mental magic's great, but let's not oversell it. I doubt zoning in is going to make Dave or anyone suddenly a productivity ninja. Esports folks spend countless hours perfecting their focus. It's not a switch you flip. And about blocking out distractions, easier said than done when every app on your laptop is screaming for attention. Plus, the zombie effect post-Zoom, that's real life. There's no game over screen where you can just respawn and feel fresh again.
All right, pulling back the hype curtain a bit here. Sure, esports athletes' focus is out of this world, but that's their full-time gig. For Dave and the rest of us, flipping between spreadsheets and emails, our brains aren't wired like pro gamers. If we try too hard to mimic their hardcore focus, we might just short circuit. And about shutting out those pesky app notifications, it's like trying to ignore the siren call of an open bag of chips. Let's face facts. Normal folks get distracted, and that post-Zoom brain fog, it ain't disappearing with wishful thinking or a couple of deep breaths. We need practical solutions, not a fantasy get-good-quick scheme.
Yeah, esports training is another world. We've got to realize everyday folks aren't looking for a leaderboard spot. They just want to get through the day without a breakdown. Besides, Simon, those practice hours gamers put in? Imagine Dave from accounting logging that time on Excel. But life's more than efficiency, right? It dawns on me, what if we flip the script? Instead of trying to fit our lives into an esports mold, let's find how esports strategies can flex to suit us. Now, I'm not talking full-on replica routines, but what about bite-sized practical versions? Say tweaking concentration methods or customizing stress relief techniques that actual humans can use without running for the hills. Now that could be something worth discussing.
Sure, esports strategies might have flashy appeal, but let's ground them into something realistic. Dave's not going to execute a perfect spreadsheet pivot under the eyes of millions, right? We're not all wired to be that next level attentive. Here's a thought. Bite-size does sound tasty, like chips you don't feel guilty eating. But forget just trimming down these strategies. Let's make them snackable for everyday living. Like mini meditations instead of hour-long Zen fests. Or quick wrist exercises over full-blown gaming boot camps. Bringing esports mental fitness to real-world situations. Now that could actually fire up some productivity without burning out. It's about making it manageable, not trying to slay dragons when you're just out here trying to sort your inbox.
So we circle it back, right? We're saying let's scale down these larger-than-life training routines into something that doesn't require a monster energy investment. It's like taking the intensity of a heavyweight training camp and turning it into something you'd actually use. Quick, effective, getting in, getting out, getting on with your life. You don't need to be ready to step into the octagon just to deal with your daily grind. It's about finding that sweet spot where improvement and reality meet, and that's the ticket. Just simple stuff that makes sense for regular folks who've got more on their plate than just leveling up their APM.
Absolutely. It's all about those small, powerful changes. Spot on.
Right, those small, powerful changes can act like cheat codes in the game of daily life. Think about how esports athletes break down training into sessions, working on specific skills in manageable chunks rather than daunting marathons. If we borrow that approach, let's call them focus sprints, we could supercharge our mundane tasks without burning out. Consider deep work. Instead of 8 hours at a stretch, what if we had intense half-hour bursts with breaks in between? That's realistic and doable. Heck, it might even make Dave feel like a bit of a hero when he crushes his to-do list, all by harnessing a nugget of gaming wisdom, turning his everyday office routine into a series of winning moves. It's not about being a world-class athlete. It's about sharpening our tools with their whetstone.
Definitely, those focus sprints sound like a game changer. It's all about making productivity more accessible and less of a grind. We don't need to go full-on esports mode, but just imagine the edge we'd have by incorporating even a slice of their discipline into our own arenas. Who knows, next time, maybe we'll dive deeper into the actual routines of these virtual athletes and see what other secrets they've got locked away in their training chests.
You know, Simon, speaking of sharpening our tools with their whetstone, it's fascinating how that translates beyond the skills. What about the personas we take on in games? They say you're a different person when you're behind the wheel. Well, what about when you're behind the screen? When gamers slip into these pixelated personas, they're stepping into alternate realities where the morals and ethics can be pretty flexible. It's intriguing to think about how these avatars we control might be influencing our decision-making in real life. Is wearing an anonymous mask in a game like donning a cloak of moral invisibility? Or is there a bleed over where we start tackling tough ethical questions in the safe sandbox of the game world? I wonder what sort of experiences our audience has had meshing their virtual personas with offline realities. This could open up a whole chest of secrets about who we are or who we become when given a digital alter ego.
Anonymity is a mask for sure, but does it change us?
Anonymity is like a wild card, Simon. It can empower people to try on different moral hats, no consequences attached. Dr. Rachel Cowart, a researcher on gaming psychology, suggests that players often experiment with their ideal selves in games. Yet the greater internet f***wad theory postulated by Penny Arcade comically hints at how anonymity and an audience can lead to worse behavior. On the flip side, research has also shown pro-social games can foster empathy and cooperation. Thilo Hartmann's studies point toward parasocial relationships, emotions felt for game characters, shaping offline behavior. Like Stanford's virtual reality experiments showing altered behavior in the real world post-VR experiences, it suggests a crossover between our digital actions and real-life ethics. This gray area opens up ethical playgrounds where one can rehearse scenarios without hurting anyone. Like philosopher Thomas Hobbes suggested, without societal rules, elements of our more primal state of nature can surface. Do these gamer identities free us to explore parts of ourselves normally chained down? Quite possibly. And when you ditch the mask, maybe some of that exploration sticks with you, for better or worse.
Hold up, let's pump the brakes here. This idea that games could alter our real-life ethics, aren't we giving pixels too much power? I mean, even if I choose to be a space tyrant in a game, does that really signal something darker beneath my cheerful puppy-loving exterior? It's a stretch. And this greater internet, what was it? Wad theory? Sure, online you'll find trolls with less charm than a cactus, but can we blame that on gaming personas? Or is it just highlighting some not-so-surprising human flaws? Maybe it's simpler. People are always looking for a reset button in life. Games give you endless continues. Real life doesn't. Plus, I'm skeptical about all that sweet, sweet empathy pouring out of pro-social games. People will take any study that tells them what they want to hear and run with it like it's the last bus out of town. But being nice to an NPC doesn't necessarily translate to holding the door for someone at the coffee shop. If anything, we might be overvaluing our digital heroics and undervaluing simple real-world kindness.
Hey listeners, if you're just tuning in, Simon and I are unpicking whether our gaming identities have the power to tweak our real-life moral compasses. We've been batting around whether forging ahead as a digital despot or space savior impacts who we are offline. The debate's heated. Some say our in-game decisions could reflect or even shape our outside ethics. Others argue that's like comparing apples to, well, pixelated apples. Can role-playing bravery online make us bolder face-to-face? Or does trolling with a virtual mask simply give a free pass to being a keyboard warrior without any true change in our personality? We're digging into all of it, walking the line between gaming psychology and everyday actions. Stick around to hear more about these digital double lives, or join in and share your take on the influence of gaming personas on real-world you.
Does your avatar's halo or horns reflect the real you?
Maybe just a funhouse mirror of our hidden impulses.
Do you think stepping into the shoes of a hero or a villain in-game gives us a safe spot to examine parts of ourselves we don't usually face?
Definitely. It's like mixed martial arts in a controlled environment, right? You step into the octagon to discover your limits, push boundaries. Similarly, gaming lets us explore our psyche without getting punched in the face.
So in that virtual ring, do you reckon we're finding out more about who we are, or just playing with the what if?
More of what if, I'd argue. It's a fantasy sandbox where the stakes are low and consequences almost nil. You throw in heroism or villainy like a disc into a games console, eager to see what happens. But does it truly reveal your inner nature? Too simple. We're complex creatures. If anything, gaming is about exploring narratives we can't or wouldn't live out. It pokes at questions like, can I be different, rather than, is this really me? There's freedom in saying, it's just a game. That's where we draw the line between bite-sized moral lessons and life's heavyweight decisions.
But hang on, isn't there a case where these gaming choices are more than just what ifs? They might be acting as dress rehearsals for real life. If someone's consistently drawn to noble causes in games, making the hard but right choices, couldn't that be reinforcing positive patterns? There's this concept of moral muscle memory, training ourselves through repetition. So when you're outside the game, your brain's already got those reps in. It knows the drill. Do good. Sure, we're multifaceted, but diving into narratives consistently aligned with specific values could sharpen those traits in reality too.
Certainly, there might be some under-the-hood tuning going on with these choices. If every day in the game world you're the white knight or the unwavering paragon, those repeated actions could start to oil the gears of your moral compass. But let's keep the invite open for listeners to jump in with their stories. Does playing a savior or scoundrel shape how you navigate the real world? Maybe next time we'll rip open the topic of moral muscle memory and dive into how much weight these virtual dumbbells actually add to our ethical strength training.
You know, we're talking about these virtual worlds and the personas we take on inside them. It really makes you think how much depth there is to gaming as a culture. Which reminds me, have you seen any of those esports documentaries or dramatizations that are cropping up everywhere? They're like pressing the turbo button on understanding the whole esports scene. Whether it's free to play or something dramatic like Netflix's 7 Days Out, they give a backstage pass to the sweat and tears behind the screens. I'm curious, what do you think these films get right, and where do they maybe punch up the drama too much? And hey, listeners, if you've got a must-watch list for diving deep into esports, let's hear it.
Absolutely, Simon. These flicks peel back the curtain on a world many misunderstand. Free to Play, for example, nails the personal sacrifice and raw emotion of competitive gaming. It's no cakewalk. These players hustle hard. But sure, there's this tendency to over-dramatize, like we're in a Hollywood blockbuster. What gets glossed over is the day-to-day grind, the less glamorous side, like any pro sport. And remember the Smash Brothers doc? A stellar deep dive without fluffing the pixels too much. For anyone looking to plug into esports culture beyond those hits, Esports, the Complete Guide by Paul Red-Eye Chaloner gives solid insights without the sensationalism. As for impact, these stories could flip the switch for esports, rocket boosting its image from niche to mainstream fame, or just as likely, set it back if drama trumps reality.
But hold on, viewers drinking up these documentaries like the finest slushies at a cinema, are we sure they're seeing the clear picture? Free to play, kudos and all, but it does cherry-pick the most gripping bits. Real esports isn't just edge-of-your-seat thrill rides. There's also the nitty-gritty of endless practice hours that kind of get the montage treatment. And dramatizations might boost esports into the limelight, but could this fame be a double-edged sword? What if the focus on nail-biting competitions overshadows the strategic depth, teamwork, and skill development that form the backbone of esports? There's a fine line between appreciation and turning a complex industry into another reality show. It's critical these docs give us the high scores and the game over screens in equal measure. So folks, which films or series make you feel like you've walked a mile in a pro gamer's shoes? And which ones missed the mark, serving up extra cheese with their digital drama? Sound off.
You hit the nail on the head, Simon. These films can sometimes make a pro gamer's life look like they're existing on a diet of victory royales and champagne pops. The truth? It's more energy drinks and wrist braces. They tend to skip the part where our champ spends 8 hours grinding just to nail that one move. Could you imagine if they showed everything real time? Here's hour 3 of Kyle practicing the same combo, and he's still practicing. Cue the snoring. But hey, props to the players who live that grind while we get to snack on the highlight reel.
Listeners hustling in late, you're right on time for our take on the esports film frenzy. We've been dissecting those glossy game docs and series that beam you straight into pro gamers' seats. Are they glorified highlight reels? Sure, sometimes. Take Free to Play. It's a tearjerker with triumphs and meltdowns. But remember, these players chug more practice than we down coffee on Monday mornings. We're asking, are these flicks giving us the real deal or just leveling up the drama? And honestly, what's seen on screen sprouts wings for the esport rep, sometimes even mega evolution style. So, got recommendations on deep dives into this pixel-packed world? Throw them into the ring.
Sure, those slick esports docs serve up drama with a side of slow-mo victory dances. But here's the rub. All that glitz might get folks to sit up and pay attention to gaming as more than just joystick waggling. Yet by spotlighting only the face-off finales and not the daily drudge, do they accidentally shortchange the real craft behind the keyboard? It's one thing to ride the roller coaster of player highs and lows. It's another to appreciate the strategy, like why pulling off that split-second in-game decision worked, analytically speaking. We've got room for both. Let's cheer the flashbang plays, but also break down the playbook. Listeners, how about it? What gets your gears grinding when it comes to telling the true esports story? And for those keen on a no-frills take, State of Play offers an unembellished lens into South Korean StarCraft fame without extra toppings. Any similar picks from your end? Fire them this way.
You know, Joe, State of Play, that's a real deep dive into the South Korean StarCraft scene. It presents this stark reality of esports, quite different from the usual razzle-dazzle. That country has a long history with competitive gaming. We're talking about a tradition dating back to the late 90s. Maybe it's worth peeling back the pixels for our listeners here. South Korea is like the promised land of esports, where players often earn rockstar status and broadcasted matches are on par with major sports events. The invested training, gamer houses, coaching staff, it's all part of a finely tuned machine pumping out world-class champions. State of Play zeroes in on that hard grind culture. It doesn't just show you the trophy lift. It gives you the bloodshot eyes for marathon gaming sessions, the crumpled snack wrappers during 2 a.m. strategies, and the weight of expectation on these players who risk it all for the win, minus the fluff. So when viewers get that kind of front row seat to not only what happens in the arena, but also life behind the monitor, they come closer to grasping the whole controller-twisting story of what it means to claw your way up in esports.
Totally, Simon. State of Play doesn't pull any punches. It shows esports warts and all. These players aren't just clicking away. They're gladiators in digital coliseums, balancing pressure and pixelated ambitions 24/7. It's relentless. It makes you think, what other untold stories are out there in the sprawling esports empire? Are there unsung heroes or trials that haven't yet had their spotlight? Films like these scratch the surface and reveal the humanity within the HUDs. So what's next on the documentary docket, folks? Which parts of this vast gaming landscape should be booted up for the big screen treatment? Let's keep unearthing those digital chronicles together.
Speaking of untold stories, Joe, it makes me wonder where all these esport legends began. Picture this, a family sitting around, munching on popcorn, getting wound up together over a video game tournament. Sounds pretty wholesome, right? Now that games are as common in homes as a tossed salad, there's this whole new arena for family bonding. It's not just about going pro. Parents could actually coach their kids right into the world of competitive gaming, focusing on things like teamwork and strategic thinking. But here we hit pause. How do you balance that screen time with real life? Got any epic tales of families morphing into lean, mean gaming teams? And what's this buzz about career paths in esports that don't involve chasing leaderboard glory? The game is more complex than ever now. Let's spawn some thoughts on that.
Absolutely, diving into esports as a family activity is a game changer. It starts with setting up a game plan for healthy play, like capping practice times and ensuring it's not nudging out homework or outdoor fun. Parental involvement is key. Moms and dads should be like in-game guides, helping navigate the fiery pits of online interactions while safeguarding their kids. We're talking firewalls, privacy settings, and good old parental controls to keep those gaming lanes safe. Plus, there's a whole XP tree of skills to level up. Communication, problem solving, leadership. These are transferable to any boss battle life throws at them. And for career play, esports have more roles than an RPG. Think about coaching, event organizing, shoutcasting, or content creation on platforms like Twitch and YouTube. The field's ripe with gigs. Now, success stories? They're plenty. Take Team Balabazi, where a father and son duo climbed ranks together, hitting tournaments and streaming sessions hand in hand. Wins double as bonding moments, and setbacks turn into group strategy resets. A real-life co-op campaign. Listeners, any family team-ups or power plays in your squad that we should highlight? Send us those origin stories.
You mentioned Team Balabazi, Joe. That father and son team-up is pure gold. Co-op campaigns in real life, huh? It got me thinking. Have you heard of any strategies or routines they've shared about how they balance gaming with daily life, or the ways they strengthen their teamwork off-screen?
Oh, absolutely. The balancing act is part networking, part strict time management. Teams like Team Balabazi often have schedules as regimented as any traditional sport, carving out specific hours for game practice that don't clash with school or work. Not to mention the family dinner table doubling as a debriefing session to hash out strategies and review gameplay. Off-screen teamwork gets its own spotlight through activities that mirror in-game coordination. Think puzzles, sports, even board games. These not only build team synergy, but also teach that critical loss recovery, which is just as important IRL as in digital battles. Remember, success in esports doesn't happen overnight. Patience, perseverance, and keeping a cool head under pressure are skills honed over years of real-world experience, all nurtured within this family gaming dynamic. And hey, listeners, whether it's Team Ballbazi or another squad, share your best practices and routines for juggling game time and reality checks.
You nailed it with that reality check, Joe. It's like any team sport. The practice-to-life balance is key. I love the idea of peppering in board games and sports for off-screen tactics training. It's teamwork on a whole new level, from cross-country rallies to conquering galaxies, all while keeping your feet planted firmly at home base. So folks, anyone else making game nights a masterclass in strategy and bonding? Spill your power play moments and how you keep the scoreboard even between esports ambition and family fun. Who knows, your playbook could be the next big tutorial in gaming family life.
You know, Simon, speaking of strategy and family game nights, that conversation actually dovetails really nicely into this fascinating blend of play and education from history. Like, think about chess's forebear, chaturanga. It was more than just a pastime. It was a tool for teaching tactics and battle strategies in ancient India. History is full of these moments where games become the classroom. Civilizations have long recognized that playing isn't just leisure. It's a way to hone critical thinking, prepare leaders, and pass on wisdom without stepping onto an actual battlefield. What's striking is how universally this idea was picked up. China's Weiqi, also known as Go, comes to mind. Even influential thinkers like Confucius mentioned these games, underscoring the role they played in education. Listeners, ever been schooled by a board game or have a historical mind-boggler that doubles as a teaching moment? Drop us your tales of cunning and conquest.
Board games as ancient brain gyms? That's some timeless wisdom.
Funny you mentioned brain gyms, Simon. I had this great uncle, a real lover of antiquities and the classics, right? Guy was sharp as a tack well into his 90s. His secret weapon? A dusty old board game collection. He'd swear by it. Every family gathering, he's there setting up these elaborate games, half the pieces you'd never see in modern renditions. It was like stepping into a time machine each time. He claimed those games kept his mind fit, like mental push-ups. Taught me chess, Go, even shogi, and he'd relate them to historic conquests and epic showdowns from the days of yore. Looking back, I realize he wasn't just passing time. He was teaching us, without us even realizing it. Strategy, patience, and predicting your opponent's moves. It was like a masterclass disguised as play. Thanks to him, I'm convinced I picked up more about tactics and wit from those sessions than I ever did in school.
Right, those family throwdowns were stealth lessons. It's a sly move. You think you're in for a quiet board game, but bam, you're learning ancient battle tactics. Grandmaster level strategy on your uncle's part, if you ask me. And let's be real, most of what I know about resource management didn't come from Econ 101. It came from the school of tabletop conquests. These games have always been Trojan horses for teaching skills we use in real life. Today's video games get the side eye sometimes, but how different are they really from these antiques of intellect my uncle adored? Call it sneaky learning. Half the time, you don't even notice your brain doing push-ups. So, to our listeners, does gaming boost your brain power like a historical strategist, or is it all just fun and games? Ever found yourself facing down an army of pawns and thought, hey, this reminds me of Tuesday's team meeting?
Oh, Simon, don't get me started on resource management from tabletop games. Sure, facing down a board game army does sometimes feel like navigating a Monday office meeting, the alliances, the backstabs. But do today's video games truly stack up to these ancient brain boxes? Maybe. Let's not slap a high score sticker on it quite yet. Classic games are simple but deep. They're like onions of strategy, layer upon layer to peel back. Meanwhile, a lot of modern video games are so chock full of stimuli, they might just skip the strategy and go straight for the dopamine rush. So tell me, are we gaining that stealthy smarts lift in today's Technicolor game world, or are we missing out on the profound teachings our pixel-less past offered? Hit us with your most scholarly take, listeners. Is there a contemporary game giving you a masterclass in strategy without you even realizing it?
Scholarly take? Ha! Look, these old school games surely pack a strategy punch, but it's time to give today's games their due. Are they as reflective and quiet as the stone-faced standoff of Chinese Go? Maybe not, but skim past the shiny exterior. There's some hearty decision-making stew brewing under the flashy hood. I've stomped around epic digital maps that forced more quick thinking than frying eggs in the morning. These ain't your grandma's board games, sure, but just because they're louder doesn't mean there isn't a method to the madness. The real art is weaving through that chaos with finesse, right? So how about it, listeners? Is there a hidden genius in mashing buttons or clicking through quests that's shaping tomorrow's tactical titans? Or have we dulled the edges of those fine mental swords our ancestors forged?
Looking at modern games as educational tools, it'd be easy to think we're miles away from those pristine, ancient lessons. I mean, navigating alien invasions doesn't exactly scream transferable skills, does it? But here's the twist. Maybe they do. These complex worlds gamers tackle, the problem-solving, resource allocation, even diplomacy with other players. These are the millennial chatarangas, my friend. Sure, they're draped in high-res graphics and steroidal soundtracks, but the core? It's still about outwitting, outplaying, and outlasting your opponents or the game itself. So let's cut through the flash and bang here. Are we underestimating gaming today as a learning tool? Is there brilliance buried beneath the button mashing that can stand toe-to-toe with history's great strategic teaches? Listeners, it's your move. Are current games checkmate champions for education or just checkers for fun?
Unbelievable to think that ancient games like Chaturanga are the great-great-granddaddies of our digital playgrounds. Underneath it all, whether it's pixels or pawns, seems like we're still sharpening the same old swords: strategy, foresight, and critical thinking. I reckon today's games still pack a cerebral punch hidden behind those VR headsets and controllers. Maybe one day there'll be classes on Fortnite strategies. Who knows? So what do you folks think? Can modern gaming stand shoulder to shoulder with these brain-teasing titans of yesteryear? Keep pondering and hit us back.
Riding the brainwave from gaming to learning, Simon, flips the chessboard into something deeper, don't you think? We're talking the grand tournament of life here, determinism versus free will. It crops up in every tabletop game, right where chance and choice clash. Every die roll, card draw pulls us between a controlled strategy and chaos of luck. So are we really calling the shots, or are the dice dictating our destiny? Imagine Plato or Aristotle throwing down in a game of Settlers of Catan. I bet they'd have a field day dissecting every move in terms of fate and free will. So what about it, listeners? Does tabletop gaming lay out life's big philosophical quandaries right there on the board, cards and dice? Would these classic thinkers be gamers if they were around today? Let's trade some thoughts on this chance versus choice conundrum.
Ah, Takes me back to my first ever tabletop tournament, real high stakes stuff. There I was, just one roll away from total victory or epic defeat in a game of Risk. The atmosphere was electric, the battlefield strewn with armies, at least on cardboard. My hand trembled as I cast those dice into the fateful tumble. Now here's where it gets interesting. Mid-roll, my opponent chuckles, "Looks like we're at the mercy of the universe now, huh?" And that tiny moment, it felt like everything slowed down, even if it was just a board game. It got me thinking deeply about how much control we really have in life. Are we generals on the battlefield of existence, or just pawns to the fates? It was over in seconds. My armies surged victorious, but the echo of that thought stuck around much longer. It wasn't about the win anymore. It was this revelation, cloaked in the thrill of a game, a glimpse into age-old debates between luck and logic.
That's a dicey situation. Literally, Simon. It's the classic tug of war between feeling like the master of your destiny and just riding the cosmic wave. Makes you ponder whether every strategic move we celebrate is just a fortunate roll. When those dice hit the board, we get this front row seat to randomness in action. Some say life's just like that, a series of throws. But then there's us making sense of the aftermath, strategizing our next move. I'm all for believing in free will, the idea that amidst chaos, we carve a path, that our tactics matter. It turns each game into a microcosm of life's big question. Are we rolling the dice on predetermined tracks, or can we bluff, pivot, and maneuver with our wits? Listeners, weigh in. Are your life's victories sheer luck of the draw, or have you rolled your way to triumph through sheer force of will?
Yo, ever think about how life's like playing Monopoly with a broke uncle? Sure, he's steering the ship when things are sailing smooth, but as soon as he lands on your hotel-heavy boardwalk, fate's cruel hand. Suddenly, it's all in the roll of the dice. Life's a sneaky dealer. Sometimes you're holding all aces, then whoops. Next thing you know, you're trading the family cow for some magic beans. Fate or free will, folks? Depends on if you're winning or losing, am I right?
Spot on. Win or lose, it's fate when convenient.
So if we're swinging between fate and free will here, do you reckon our ancient philosophers would be team dice or team decision at the gaming table? Would they see every game as a mini epic of destiny, or just another place where our choices carve out the path to victory?
So how about it, Simon? Do you think old school thinkers would grab the dice and trust in fate, or lean into strategy, embracing the power of choice? What's your take? Would Plato plot out his empire, or just toss and let destiny decide?
Plato, huh? I'd bet my last game piece he'd be all about the strategy, building his republic brick by intellectual brick on that board. He's the type to see the dice as just tools in a grander scheme of forms and ideals. The die is cast, but it's the mind that shapes reality, right? Old Aristotle might disagree, though. Might say that there's a bit of golden mean in gaming. Sometimes you strategize, sometimes you roll with fate. It's about balance. Listeners, what do you think? Would these philosopher kings rule the game night with meticulous plans, or embrace the whims of chance with open arms?
Aristotle and the golden mean. A solid point, Simon. But let's twist it further, shall we? Stoics like Seneca might just scoff at the dice altogether. He'd argue every roll's an opportunity to practice indifference to misfortune. Easy to say until you land on Park Place with 4 houses, right? And imagine the cynics. They'd probably suggest flipping the whole darn board over, claiming the game itself is a social construct designed to distract us from life's true purpose. So here's where I'm throwing down the gauntlet. Are these games just an illusion of control within life's chaotic theater? Listeners, are your strategies really steering the ship? Or are we all just captives to the cosmic currents, setting sail in a sea of chance?
Oh, I can see the headlines now. Stoic philosopher flips Monopoly board, claims victory over materialism. But if Seneca and pals were at my game night, you better believe they'd be all in on chance. Rolling dice is nature's way, right? It's like life handing you lemons. Stoic or not, nobody's calm when they hit double sixes and skydive straight into bankruptcy.
Absolutely. Picture Stoic philosophers playing Monopoly. What a scene. But zoom out. Every culture's got its quirks and games. Like, go to Italy. It's all about who can gesture the most extravagantly. Board game night there could be as much performance art as strategy. Now, in England, it's apologizing, even when you're crushing someone at Scrabble. Oh, terribly sorry for that triple word score, old chap. Contrast that with the Russian spirit, where chess plays like a Cold War microcosm. Always 4 moves ahead, never show weakness. Listeners, thinking about your own cultures, how do these nuances bleed into your game nights? Does the room turn into a Roman Senate or a polite British tea party? Share those funny cultural twists from your corner of the map.
Fascinating stuff. The world's one big game board, with each culture adding its own house rules. Thinking cap on, listeners. How do your local traditions shape the games you play and the life strategies you apply? Does where you're from predetermine the game you're playing? All right, folks, share those tales and let's unravel this tapestry of gaming philosophies. What's your next move?
It's a wild ride diving into gaming and cultures. Speaking of blending traditions and fun, ever notice how some of the quirkiest games aren't on a console or in a box, but right there in the back of your local pub? It's where strangers become mates over a pint and a game of something that looks like it was invented on the spot. Take Shove Ha Penny. Seems simple, but there's an art to sliding those coins, a ballet of the fingertips. And Rings, where the dexterity of a dart pro meets the philosophy of horseshoes. From bars bustling with cribbage champs to taverns where dart legends are made, the human connection's alive and well. So folks, what's the weirdest or most wonderful pub game you've stumbled upon? Let me hear those stories.
Hey there, new listeners. You've just crash-landed into a jovial chat about the wild world of traditional pub games from every corner of the globe. We've been waxing lyrical about classics like Shove Ha Penny and Rings, these little-known gems that turn pubs into playgrounds where strangers bond and friends compete. It's all about those quirky, hands-on games tucked away in the social hubs of our cultures. So grab a drink, pull up a chair, and let's dig deeper into these communal customs that keep the art of play alive. And hey, do tell, what's the local gaming flavor from where you hail?
Well, Simon, let's flip the coaster for a sec. There's a flip side where these pub games might seem cliquey. To an outsider or someone new in town, all this tradition packed into throwing metal rings or sliding coins on old wood can be intimidating. It's like you need a local guidebook just to understand what's happening. And honestly, some folks argue that these games create an in-crowd feeling, where if you're not already in the loop, you feel left out. You stroll into a pub seeking connection, but find a ritual that's alien, a language spoken in scores and hand-eye coordination that newbies don't quite grasp yet. So while we celebrate these cultural curiosities, let's not forget the power they hold, to unite or to mystify. Listeners, ever felt like an outsider at game night? Share those stories too. They're just as vital to the tapestry of pub gaming culture.
Absolutely, Joe. These games can be a secret handshake that you just don't know. There's this cabal vibe when the locals are huddled together, chucking darts like they're casting spells. And here you are, feeling like you've walked into an episode of Cheers, but no one knows your name. Not exactly the welcome party you envisioned. But consider this. Isn't diving into the deep end part of the fun? Might take a few awkward throws or coin slides, but joining that in-crowd could be as simple as asking, how do you play? We could flip it from mystifying to unifying, inviting newcomers to toss their hat in the ring. Literally. And hey, maybe it's time for pubs to mix it up. Throw in a game anyone can jump into. How about live-action Hungry Hungry Hippos? Now there's a level playing field for you. Listeners, picture that, and hit us with those times you turned an outside eye moment into the night you became the local Shove a Penny champ.
Asking is you're in every master was once a disaster.
Oh, I've got a tale for this. So picture this. I'm traveling, right? End up in this cozy Irish pub in the middle of nowhere. There's laughter, clanking glasses, classic scene. And there, in the corner, is this game. A board with little metal hooks, score numbers above them. It's Rings. Now me, I'm as clueless as a penguin in a library. I must have looked lost because this old fella, you could tell he's a regular. He's all twinkly-eyed, craggy smile. He waves me over. Give it a go, he says. I'm terrible at first, but each miss gets a cheer louder than the last, and soon enough, I'm not just playing Rings. I'm part of their story, a temporary local. It wasn't about winning, it was about being welcomed into their world. Those moments stick with you, don't they? They show the heart of these games isn't scoring points, it's cracking open the doorway to a new family.
Breaking the ice one toss at a time, pub magic indeed.
Games aren't just games, they're passports to new friendships, magic.
Couldn't agree more, Simon. Games unlock doors to unexpected bonds.
You ever think these pub games started as dares between drunk mates? Like two guys lock eyes over their fifth pint and one slurs, "Bet you can't toss a ring on that hook." And thus, centuries of tradition are born. I'd bet my last coin the first game of darts was just a guy who got tired of finger painting with his ale and chucked his quill at the wall. Cheers to accidental history.
Haha, probably how beer pong got started too, Simon.
Man, that reminds me of this one summer barbecue, a proper mess with burgers flipping and buns flying. We've got a bunch of mismatched cups set up for beer pong, right? But hey, no ping pong balls. Classic planning. Now I'm eyeing this kid's bouncy ball. It's neon, it's ridiculous. It couldn't be less appropriate. I snag it, drop it in the first cup, and suddenly we're off to the races, laughing like hyenas. Every wild bounce became part of our new chaotic rulebook. By night's end, everyone's mastered the art of the errant bounce shot. Turns out, sometimes you don't need the right equipment, just the right people. Folklore often starts by winging it with what you've got. It's not about the game, it's about the bonds over those wonky throws and shared memories.
Improvised rules, best mates, it's the people, not the game.
Joe, might want to pump the brakes there. It's easy to say it's all about people until someone, let's call him Simon, gets schooled at table football by a grinning 10-year-old. Sure, I laughed on the outside, but here's a twist. What if it isn't the people or the game? What if it's the rivalry? The stories we tell after aren't about who won or lost. They're about the time Simon got thrashed by a kid half his height. That sting of defeat and the glory of victory simmer down into legends that get taller each time they're poured out. So maybe it's the friendly competition that makes these games cross thresholds and bridge cultures. Thoughts?
Simon's got a point. Do you think it's that spicy mix of competition and camaraderie that turns a simple game into an epic saga over time?
Joe, I'm not sold. Think about it. The epic sagas aren't just born from competition. It's a bit deeper. Those late-night banter sessions and supportive cheers, this is the core of it all, not just the rivalry. Competition can bring people together briefly, but it's the quirks of culture, the funky traditions, weird game rules that make stories worth retelling. They spark curiosity and keep us coming back, hoping to be part of the next legendary yarn that'll survive long after last call. It's cultural DNA, mate. That spice? It's less about winning and more about shared human moments turning mundane into memorable.
Culture's in the quirks, so we keep circling back for more stories. What are your quirky tales?
Speaking of quirky tales, this one's like something out of Indiana Jones. Ever hear about the royal game of Ur? It's an ancient board game, thousands of years old, and it pretty much vanished off the face of the earth. Then, bam! The 1920s come along. Sir Leonard Woolley's digging around in Mesopotamia and unearths this legendary game. It's insane to think about a game just dropping off the map. Makes me wonder why we ditch one thing for another. Like, one day, kids are playing with pogs. Next thing you know, they're ancient history, unless some archaeologist digs them up in 3000 AD. Why do you reckon things go from all the rage to forgotten pages in history, Joe?
Could be a matter of survival, Simon. Take the royal game of Ur. It had to compete with newer, shinier games. It's like when smartphones hit the scene and suddenly no one's buying flip phones anymore. Or maybe society just changes, new priorities or disasters wipe out old trends. I wouldn't be surprised if half the stuff we're into now ends up buried for some future Joe and Simon to puzzle over on a podcast episode 2,000 years from now.
You're bang on, mate. It's just like that with Ur. Throughout its heyday in ancient Mesopotamia, it was all the rage. Found in royal tombs like the one in Ur, hence the name, it was clearly a hit with high society. The game swept under the rug for millennia until Woolley comes along and bam, You've got these elegant board pieces with eyes staring at you from history. But when something newer hits the scene, like backgammon, it can shunt old favorites into the shadows. As for those disasters and social shifts you mentioned, spot on too. Think of the Bronze Age collapse. Societies crumbled, invaded left and right. There goes the neighborhood, and there goes the royal game of Ur. And let's not forget about time's eraser effect. Stuff gets literally lost under dirt. No example better than the Dark Ages overwriting Rome's hard drive. What survived? Not much. Coding, building, in Ur's case, gaming, all rebooted. Shows how civilization's mood swings can shove whole chapters of culture into the attic. Now we dig them out and dust them off, trying to stitch the narrative back together.
Absolutely, Simon. So what's your take on how they pieced together the game's rules after all that time under the dirt?
You've got to appreciate the detective work that went into cracking the royal game of Ur's code. This wasn't a case where Sir Leonard Woolley found an ancient rulebook lying around. They had the board, they had pieces, no instructions included. Enter Irving Finkel, this curator from the British Museum with a love for puzzles more twisted than your grandma's knitting. In the 80s, he stumbles upon a cuneiform tablet from Babylonian times, right? As it turns out, this stone slice of history described the rules of Ur. Talk about winning the historical lottery. Using these translated clues and by studying the game board's layout themselves, historians have been able to reconstruct how the game might have been played. We're talking a race between two players, dice rolling action. Strategy, it's kind of like the great granddaddy of backgammon. But there's still heated debate among board game buffs. Some details aren't clear-cut, leaving room for interpretation. It's like resurrecting a song from a few piano keys. It gets you humming, guessing, but maybe not the whole tune. And that's what makes ancient games so cool, piecing together the past, one roll at a time.
It's incredible, isn't it? You've got fragments of evidence, a few old rocks scrawled with cuneiform, and you use that to rebuild an entire game, filling in the blanks where history left us hanging. But like you said, some bits are missing, so scholars debate over what those gaps could mean. They're sleuthing through the centuries, trying to solve a puzzle without all the pieces. It's what keeps these ancient mysteries alive and kicking for us history nerds, constantly updating our guesses as new clues emerge.
Absolutely. But I'll play devil's advocate for a sec, Joe. We say it's incredible, right? But let's be real. How much can you trust conclusions built on bits and bobs of defunct texts and old rocks? Imagine future folks trying to figure out how we lived based on our memes or TikTok dances. Good luck with that. Plus, scholars fighting over the missing pieces is like watching your family argue over Monopoly rules at Christmas. It gets heated. Everyone's got an opinion. No one really knows if Grandpa's free parking jackpot rule is legit, but they'll defend it to the death. And maybe that's what it's all about, the debate, the mystery itself, rather than solving it. It keeps us hooked, trying to bridge that gap between what we know and what we're guessing. Injects a bit of drama into dusty history. Makes you wonder what else we've got completely wrong about the past because we're interpreting ancient selfies through a modern filter.
You can't ignore the gap between what we think we know and what's just us filling in the blanks. We get a piece of the puzzle and we're off to the races. But half the time, it's like putting together IKEA furniture without the manual. You've got a bunch of leftover pieces and no idea if the thing's going to stand up straight. Makes you question, are we getting closer to the truth about the past, or just crafting a story we want to believe because the mystery is too irresistible?
Oh, totally. Here's the kicker. You have to imagine ancient gamers looking down at us, having a good old laugh. Haha, look at these mugs trying to figure out Ur. They think Thag's poker chip was a sacred game piece. It's like we're accidentally turning their everyday knickknacks into profound artifacts. Next thing you know, a future archaeologist digs up a fidget spinner and deduces it was a tool for meditation and enlightenment. Smack dab in the middle of seminar. And here, esteemed colleagues, we have the spinner of fate used in high-stakes decision-making rituals. Oh, the humanity.
I'd pay to see that seminar. And who's to say they're wrong? Someday, our junk could be their treasures. It's a cyclical comedy. What we discard becomes the next generation's relic. But there's this irresistible itch in human nature to make sense of these mysteries. Take the Voynich manuscript or Stonehenge. We might never crack them, but it doesn't stop us from spinning theories. It keeps history dynamic, like a constantly evolving game where each player throws down a hypothesis and waits to see if it sticks. It's the not knowing for sure that gives unsolved puzzles their charm.
That's just it, Joe. With unsolved mysteries like the Voynich manuscript and Stonehenge, it's all about the chase. Humans can't help but love a good enigma. It's like our brains are wired for whodunits. We're slap happy for puzzles without answers because they offer unlimited potential for imagination. And honestly, sometimes I reckon we prefer the riddles to remain unsolved. It keeps that spark of wonder alive, because as long as there's a little bit of unknown, there's always more to explore. Speaking of unsolved cases, have you ever dived into the world of spontaneous human combustion? Now there's a hot topic.
Spontaneous human combustion certainly sparks the imagination, just like those culinary magicians, chefs transforming ingredients into explosive flavors. The chemistry of taste is a science all its own, creating gustatory fireworks that rival any mystery out there. Ever wonder how our tongues turn a mix of proteins, fats, and spices into a symphony of savory, sweet, sour, bitter, or umami on the palate? It's all down to that culinary chemistry. Chefs are like alchemists, really, combining elements to create gold for our taste buds.
Chefs are taste wizards, our tongues, their personal test labs.
Oh, absolutely, man. Our tongue is ground zero for flavor fireworks. Chefs, they're out there on the front lines experimenting with this stuff, figuring out just how to hit all those notes perfectly. Like, you ever had something where it's so good, your taste buds feel like they're going to outer space? That's no accident. It's all about knowing what each ingredient brings to the table. Literally.
So, Joe, when you're out at that gourmet spot, digging into a dish that's popping off with flavor, do you ever try to break down what the chef's doing? Like, think about how they're layering those basic tastes to create that cosmic taste bud trip.
Totally reminds me of this time when I was at this hole-in-the-wall Thai spot. The chef comes out, right, and he's like, "I'll make you something special." What he brought to the table blew my mind. A simple green curry. Now, I've had green curry 100 times, but this one, the way the creamy coconut balanced with the fiery chilies, that punch of basil and lemongrass, it was like he'd engineered each spoonful to tap directly into my flavor receptors. That meal wasn't just eating, it was a lesson in flavor harmony. Every bite since then, I'm dissecting the layers, trying to taste the science behind the art.
Chef's secret sauce, tongue taekwondo with a side of science.
Ha! For sure. It's like every chef's got that killer move, right? Wham! Bam! You're hit with that umami bomb, and before you know it, your taste buds are in a headlock, totally tapping out. And the science side, it's all these complex compounds interacting to create those distinct flavors we love. Seriously, sometimes you'd think you need a PhD to figure out what's going on in your mouth.
Right? So, Joe, when you're picking apart the dish like a flavor detective, can you actually guess what the chef's secret ingredient or technique is? Or does it end up as one of those tastes amazing, no clue how they did it moments?
Hit or miss, but that's half the fun.
You ever watch a chef whip up something fancy and think, buddy, the spice rack's not a Rubik's Cube. Relax. Sometimes it feels like they sprinkle in a pinch of quantum physics. Like I'm half expecting my steak to disrupt the space-time continuum, and boy, howdy, wouldn't that be a trip? Eat your way to yesterday, folks.
Steak time travel, now there's a special on the menu.
No kidding. But, steak through time? I don't know, Joe. The chemistry of taste is wild enough without bending the laws of physics. Ever think how taste can feel sorta like color for your tongue? Like, this song tastes purple. Makes me wish we took Flavor Perception 101 back in school. Instead of algebra, let's crack the code on why cilantro tastes like soap to some folks, or how a dash of salt can put your sweet receptors into overdrive. That's the kind of everyday magic I'd stay awake in class for.
Ha! Flavor Perception 101 over algebra any day. Think about those wild taste test experiments they could do. Give me a tangy lime and let me figure out why it's more face pucker worthy than a lemon. That's practical science. Sure, you can keep your quadratic equations. I'll take figuring out why some days milk tastes amazing and other days it's just meh. And don't get me started on cilantro. That stuff is the ultimate flavor mystery. Some folks say soap, others swear it's fresh heaven in leaf form. That's not enjoying food. That's engaging with a culinary enigma.
Oh, the cilantro debate is pure genetics, my man. Some people have a gene variant that makes them sensitive to aldehydes in cilantro, chemical compounds also found in soap, hence the soapy taste for them. As for milk, its flavor can change based on what the cows eat and how it's processed. Then there's the miracle berry, which flips sour to sweet by binding to your taste buds and tweaking their response. And limes being more face pucker worthy? It's all due to different acids they contain. Less citric acid in limes compared to lemons means more of a sour punch. Toss salt onto something sweet and you're mellowing the bitter receptors, making sweetness jump out. Taste isn't just about taste, it's also what you smell, see, and even think. Flavor Perception 101 would be jam-packed, Joe.
What about texture then? You think that plays a big part in our perception of flavor too?
Totally. Texture's like the unsung hero of Flavortown.
I hear ya. It reminds me of my aunt's apple pie. Everyone in the family swore by it, calling it the best pie ever. Year after year at family gatherings, we'd dig into these perfectly crumbly slices of heaven. Now, I've had plenty of apple pies, but none came close to hers. So one day I cornered her for the secret. You know what she tells me? It's all in how you handle the dough. Not the apples, not the cinnamon, the crust. Turns out she barely touched that dough, just enough to get it together, then left it super chunky. And there it is, texture. The way the flaky crust played with the soft, spiced apples, that contrast made all the difference. That bite was like a symphony where the texture harmony amplified the flavors. Just proved to me how crucial texture really is. It's the rhythm section of every flavor band, foundational yet underestimated.
Crust is the backbone, man. Lifts the whole pie experience.
Sure, crust brings it together, but let's not overlook the filling. The apples, cinnamon, sugar, all blending in a dance of sweetness and spice. That's where the magic happens. It's the star of the show for a reason. A pie with mediocre filling can't be saved by its crust. The balance of textures matters, but taste, that's the lead singer. It's what lingers and defines the memory of that dessert. We're wired to prioritize flavor, sugars, salts, umami. Could be why we can easily name our favorite tastes, yet describing why a texture appeals is harder. Flavor hits us on an emotional level.
Absolutely, Joe. The filling is where the flavor party is at. It's got the sugar, the spice, and everything nice. Combining that with the texture of the crust just creates food harmony. Isn't it intriguing how our taste buds and brain work together to paint this delicious picture of what we eat? Makes you wonder about all the other mysterious ways our body navigates the world of flavors.
Speaking of the mysteries and flavors, that brings us to the doorstep of molecular gastronomy. Have you heard about this stuff? Some folks call it culinary witchcraft, but it's really just hardcore food science, using chemistry and physics to whip up dishes that'll blow your mind. It's like 1 minute you're eating what looks like caviar, and the next thing you know, it bursts into mango juice in your mouth. Wild, right? What's your take on bringing the lab to the kitchen? Simon, is it sorcery or just brilliant science?
Sorcery or science, eh? I like to call it the Houdini of haute cuisine. Sure, it's all chemicals and reactions, but let's not pretend it doesn't have that wow factor that makes you think there's a wizard in Chef's Whites behind the curtain. And brilliant science? Absolutely. But here's the hot take. Isn't it veering off into a gimmick territory? Let food be food, right? Last time I checked, my spaghetti didn't need to foam at the mouth to taste good. When we choose style over substance, are we still cooking, or are we just showing off with beakers and liquid nitrogen?
You're hitting the nail on the head with style over substance. However, think about molecular gastronomy as just another tool in the arsenal, like fire was to the first cook. Sure, we don't need our food frothing or encapsulated in edible bubbles, but doesn't pushing boundaries lead us to new discoveries? Here's a thought. Combine traditional cooking with this modern technique. Imagine getting that home-cooked meal vibe with a twist that could only come from these methods. Not replacing, but enhancing. There's room at the table for both, don't you think?
Enhancing, huh? Sure, pushing boundaries is great, but here's the rub. Food is about connection, cultures, families, memories. When you're turning grandma's stew into an emulsion or deconstructing classic apple pie into a gel, aren't we losing something? It's like taking a guitar and trying to turn it into a synthesizer. Both make music, but the soul isn't the same. Gastronomy gets all sci-fi, but sometimes I just want my food to feel, well, like food. Let's not forget the simple joy of recognizable dishes that have been loved for generations. Can't replace that heartwarming bite with a fancy foam, no sir.
Funny thing, my neighbor's kid, a curious little fella, always stirring up things. One day, he decides to bake cookies using one of those molecular gastronomy kits he got for his birthday. The idea was to create a sort of cookie experience, rather than just cookies. So he's in the kitchen, laser-focused on turning chocolate chips into dust and trying to make cookie dough foam. Hours go by, and then comes the moment of truth, tasting time. You should have seen his face. It wasn't disgust or joy, it was sheer confusion. This science project of a cookie wasn't hitting the same nostalgic feels as the traditional chewy ones his mom made. That kid's baking escapade? It reminded me that experimentation has its place, but there's something grounding about the straightforward, tried and tested path. It doesn't mean either is better overall, but sometimes you can't beat the classic approach. Even when we dive into the new and innovative, our roots still call out to us from those familiar flavors and textures we grew up with.
Classics comfort. They're the culinary hug we all need sometimes.
Exactly, Simon. Classics have staying power. They're not just meals, they're emotional touchstones. Molecular gastronomy is fascinating, no debate there. It stretches the canvas of creativity in cooking, gives us a peek into the future of food. Science, yes, but it's more of an art. This isn't about rejecting innovation or dismissing tradition. Balance is key. That's where the real culinary magic happens. Keep the hug that grandma's stew gives you and marvel at the foam that tastes like it. That's not ditching heritage, it's honoring it with a flourish. So we savor the comforts of home while keeping an eye on the wonders science dishes out. Because hey, even if it's sorcery to some, it's darn good entertainment, provided it doesn't take itself too seriously. At the end of the day, food shared with friends around a table, those basics will never lose their flavor, whether it's magic or molecule meddling.
That's the perfect recipe, Joe. Tradition meets innovation on a plate.
Exactly, it's about blending the old with the new. Honestly, when you break it down, what is cooking if not chemistry? It's science in practice. Our ancestors experimented with fire and flavors. Now chefs experiment with liquid nitrogen and hydrocolloids. And all right, some people may say, stick to roasting and baking. But where's the fun in that? If molecular gastronomy can turn a dining experience into an adventure without losing the essence of what makes food great, which is bringing people together, then why not? At the end of the day, for me, whatever gets people excited about sitting down and eating is a win. So let the chefs be magicians. We'll be the happy audience. Just don't forget to pass down those family recipes while we marvel at the sorcery that modern science brings to the kitchen table.
Chefs as magicians? Sure, pull a rabbit out of your hat, but make it taste like chicken. Here's my angle. Chemistry set or kitchen set, the real magic fades if we're nitpicking our dishes under a microscope. Call me old-fashioned, but I'll take a juicy burger over a deconstructed one any day. You can turn my fries into foam and make them float, but will they satisfy that deep-rooted craving? Doubt it. Plus, there's this. Molecular gastronomy often serves up a plate full of drama with a side of hunger. It's cool, but can it fill you up after a long day? It's more spectacle than supper. Now, innovation in moderation, that's more palatable. Let's not miss the forest for the truffle-infused trees, buddy.
I hear you on the drama, Simon. Sometimes it feels like molecular gastronomy is the culinary equivalent of someone using too much CGI in a movie. Pretty spectacular, sure, but sometimes you leave the theater feeling like you missed out on a solid story. And let's be real, the gastronomy fanatics might turn their noses up at a juicy burger, but that burger is iconic for a reason. It's love at first bite. It doesn't need a fancy title or a smoke show. It fills you up and hits the spot without any pretense. Still, as much as I'll take a good old-fashioned meal over something I can't pronounce, there's room to respect the artistry and technique behind those mad science dishes. They're not my go-to, but they've sparked discussions about food that we never would have had otherwise. The question worth chewing over might really be, can we have our cake, whether it's defying gravity or not, and eat it too? Where's the line between elevating cuisine and just eating for the sake of novelty?
Honestly, Joe, that line's thinner than my patience when someone tries to overcomplicate a good meal. I get the allure, foodies chasing the next big thrill on their plate, but let's remember we're creatures of habit at our core. We crave what's familiar and comforting. Molecular gastronomy? That's Friday night entertainment, not your Monday dinner staple. It's like putting ketchup on everything. It's fun once in a while, but do it too much, and you'll lose taste for the actual food. So go ahead, chefs, play around with foams and spheres, but if a dish needs a 5-minute explanation before diving in, maybe we've wandered off the path a bit too far from what makes eating such a visceral joy. Let's keep some dishes grounded, like gravity-bound cake. No anti-gravity tricks needed.
Couldn't agree more, Simon. Molecular gastronomy has its place as an occasional showpiece, an extravagant side dish to the main course of our dining lives. Innovation should spark interest without extinguishing the flames of tradition. Let's let food be that blend of craft and comfort, with maybe a sprinkle of science for flavor. After all, isn't part of enjoying a meal the surprise of what might come next, be it from a time-honored recipe or a syringe full of culinary adventure? So listeners, we're curious. Where do you draw your line in the culinary sand? Does molecular gastronomy enhance the table for you, or is it just highbrow theatrics on a plate? Let's keep chewing on that.
Speaking of culinary adventures, let's talk about the lighter side of these kitchen experiments. Sometimes things get wacky when you cross cooking with a chemistry set. It creates scenes right out of a sitcom, like foams, fumes, and fizz, laugh at the lab-gone diner. I recently heard about this guy attempting to make an exploding lemon dessert. Story goes, he'd serve it, and poof, a delightful citrus-scented puff of smoke would appear. Well, the only thing that exploded was the recipe. The thing went off like a lemon grenade. His kitchen looked like a crime scene from a cartoon, sticky and yellow, everywhere. It makes you wonder how many amateur kitchen chemists out there are just one misread instruction away from turning their peaceful home into an impromptu foam party. Now that's comedy served fresh with a little zest on top.
Hey folks, if you're just tuning in, we've been getting a kick out of the hilarious mishaps that can happen when home cooks try their hand at molecular gastronomy, which is food science gone wild. We're calling it foams, fumes, and fizz. Laugh at the lab-gone diner. It's all about those oopsie-daisy moments when trying to turn your kitchen into a science lab goes hilariously wrong, like lemon desserts turning into sticky citrus bombs. Trust me, there's nothing like a zesty explosion to add some flavor to your day. Stick around for more kitchen capers that'll make you chuckle.
All right, here's the deal with molecular gastronomy. It's all about manipulating food on a molecular level to change its taste, texture, and appearance. The trend kicked off thanks to chefs like Ferran Adrià and Heston Blumenthal, real innovators who brought science to the art of cooking. Now, basics first. For foams, chefs typically use lecithin, a soy or egg yolk extract, which helps trap air in liquids. Fizzing sensations, that's usually thanks to something called calcium lactate. Mix it with sodium alginate, and you've got yourself some spherification action, turning liquids into edible bubbles. As for fumes, dry ice is the go-to, but safety first. It can freeze your fingers off if you're not careful. It sounds like fun and games until Timmy from next door creates an indoors snowstorm because he wanted ice cream that smokes when you scoop it. Oh boy, kitchen experiments. They're not just recipes, they're mini adventures without leaving home. But remember, kiddos, Trying this at home means following strict instructions, unless you want to turn dinner time into a scene from Back to the Future.
Timmy's smoking ice cream. Now that's a chilling kitchen tale.
And let me tell you, it's not just smoking deserts. There are those trying to infuse every dish with a hint of smog. Imagine sipping on your soup and accidentally setting off a fog machine under the table. Sure, they were going for ambience, but ended up needing a lighthouse to navigate the dining room. These experiments often crack me up. It's like we're one step away from serving dinner with a side of lab goggles. And hey, as much as I joke about these foamy fails and fizzy flops, props to anyone bold enough to whip out the liquid nitrogen next to the lettuce. You might not nail that avant-garde appetizer on the first try, but you'll have a whale of a time and possibly enlighten your smoke detector to new culinary horizons.
Dinner theater with a side of safety hazards, Simon.
Absolutely, Joe. It's like every meal is suddenly a ticket to a science exhibit that might just scorch your eyebrows off. I mean, where else but at the Lab Gone Diner do you get a main course of pot roast with a dessert of, oops, I torched the kitchen? And it's the unexpected moments that are the best. The unintentional tomato foam that started as sauce, or that time someone tried making fizzy fruit and ended up with a bubbly mess that resembled a kid's science fair volcano. Just picture Aunt Edna's face when the mashed potatoes start floating off the plate because they've been aerated within an inch of their life. Sure, turns dinner into quite a sensation, but maybe not the way you want, unless your goal was potato-themed anti-gravity. So to all those homegrown chefs out there turning their kitchens into mini labs, keep the fire extinguisher handy. And remember, folks, not all experiments end in Michelin stars, but they sure can lead to Michelin-sized stories.
Ha! Science fair volcanoes is a culinary trend. Love it.
So, Joe, this one time, I decided to make my own bread from scratch. Simple enough, right? Well, I may have misjudged yeast's power to rise. Fast forward a few hours, and it's like my dough had ambitions of becoming a mattress. It filled the entire oven, puffed up through the range, and started spilling out onto the floor like some slow-mo sci-fi blob. I'm staring at this thing like it's going to ask me for rent. Anyway, when I finally got it cleaned up, it hit me. Sometimes you just gotta let things be simple. No fancy chemicals needed when nature's got its own set of tricks up its sleeve. That bread beast in my kitchen was a great reminder that even the most basic ingredients can throw you for a loop. Makes you respect the restraint good chefs have, especially when they're messing with food science. They're like wizards who know exactly how much magic to sprinkle before it turns your kitchen into a wild wonderland or a disaster zone.
And with that lively yarn about the dough with a life of its own, we've got to wrap up today's tasty tales from the kitchen lab. Thanks to all you stellar listeners for tuning in and sharing some laughs with us here at Infinite Podcast. Whether you're aiming for kitchen alchemy or sticking to classic cooking, remember, sometimes things rise, sometimes they fizz, and sometimes, well, they might just take over your oven. Be sure to come back tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern for more chatter that'll leave you hungry for more without any fear of spillover. Stay safe out there and keep those food experiments mildly wild. Catch you next time.